I don't even know where I'm going with this. I'm going to edit a lot of this out just because I'm not making a script. Welcome to Silver Stats, the series where I, as a passably average gamer, talk about passably above average gamers and why they're better than I am. As you can see, we've got a lot of data, a lot of numbers, a lot of stuff, because we're going to talk about farming. We're going to talk about pro stats. We're going to talk about a lot of things here. So let's start off with where I got the data from. This is from the spring 2022 split. We're talking about essentially every Riot-sanctioned event. Every Riot-sanctioned league. This covers LCS, LCK, LPL, LEC, all the big ones you know. It also covers the smaller regions. It covers Brazil, it covers Vietnam, it covers Oceania, it covers the Philippines, it covers Turkey, it covers everything. It also covers Turkey's Academy League, it covers the ERLs, the European regional leagues, it covers LCS Academy, it covers collegiate teams in North America. If Riot sanctioned it, it's here. So I separated it by position, separated by team. We're looking at position in particular right now because we have farming. And I'm not going to go through the specifics of how much gold you get for farm or anything like that. That's not really what I'm here for. So as we're talking about farm and we're talking about why farming is important, there's different roles, different lanes. So when we sit down and try and evaluate what good farm is, it's hard, right? It's hard to quantify what valuable farm is. And so I separated farm into 5 different groups. And the reason why I did this is partially because there's so many rigid numbers when it comes to CS per minute, because that's what we like to measure it in. Measuring raw CS doesn't really help when you have really long games and really short games, so it's easier to measure it per minute. The issue with measuring CS per minute is that there's so many different values, because every 1 second change is going to change that CS per minute value. So to make it a little bit easier, I've separated it into 5 groups: A, B, C, D, and E. If you know how bell curves work, that's a horrendous looking bell curve, but that's okay. You have your average right here. We're going to rewrite this. We're going to do this. We're going to call that good, okay? So you have your mean right here. Then fancy number people realize they have these things called standard deviations. You can separate the mean by your standard deviations, and that essentially shows the variance of your data. Because if you have this crazy outlier right here, you don't want that to be representative of your entire mean, right? Because it's going to be representative of your entire average. If this is just obscenely huge, it's going to mess up your average. And so that's why they have the standard deviations, because that allows you to kind of get a better idea of your variance, which is a better idea of what's actually going on when it comes to these numbers. So quick little, fun little stats lesson for you. The way I organize these 5 groups is through standard deviations. We go back to this nice little drawing here. If we say that's our mean and we say that's standard deviation 1, standard deviation 2, right? We just say that that's the case. If that's the case, this right here is group A. This is group B. This is this entire thing. This whole chunk is group C. This is group D, and this is group E. So essentially the goal of this grouping system is to make sure that we have the really bad outliers on the bottom end, the really good outliers on the top end, and the people who are trending low, trending high, and then your vast majority is going to be in this middle section. And that's kind of why I'm looking to do that. And so you can see that in these numbers. The group A for top lane is less than 5.2 farm per minute. I believe that's around gold range. So what that's saying is that there are matches in pro play that are so far down on that list that they're getting less than 5 farm per minute. Top laners are, at least. The same thing for support. Support's a little funky. I kind of have it shifted 1 standard deviation, because more than 1 standard deviation below the average for support games is 0, and that doesn't really help. So but support is actually, coincidentally enough, 1/10 of that It's a half a farm per minute. So on the very low end, pro sports are getting half a farm per minute. So before you start feeling bad about having low farm, remember that there is actually precedent for very, very low numbers here. Groups B through D are really your main bulk, right? That's going to be your biggest value. And you see that in the numbers. For top lane, that ranges from 5.2 to 10.58 farm per minute. And that's a huge range. That is from, as I said, about a silver farm, silver gold, to nearly perfect. So that's a pretty massive range. Not really that helpful. So instead, we're going to separate a little bit more and see what we can figure out. I'm just kind of looking at what pros are doing with farm. And we're going to extrapolate some interesting information about that. I think you're going to like it. I did. Hope you will too. First, you can see that win rates seem to trend upward as your farm increases, which, right? Pretty consistently. Most things, with the exception of jungle, which I'll get to in a second, most teams or most roles sit around 40% win rate, even on the lowest end. But then they can climb to about this like 75 to 80 range, again with the exception of support or exception of jungle. And so you're getting about a 30 to 40% increase in win rate just by farming, which is huge. That's insane. Being able to gain that much on your win rate just by farming better, ignoring objective control, ignoring having a high KDA, ignoring, wave management or whatever, and all of that is still important. All of that will help you with your CS. But knowing that just your CS can increase your win rate by about 35%, we'll ignore that 5. That's a horrendous looking 5, but about 35%, that's crazy. It's good to know. So we're going to talk about a couple things that are specific to pro play that I found really interesting regarding that win rate. First and foremost, we need to talk about this little guy. There's only one game recorded in Group D of supports in this 2.26 to 2.84 range. There's only one game recorded. And so if you win it, it's 100. If they'd lost it would have been 0. So that's an outlier. We can reasonably assume that the line's going to trend like that, and that Group D would sit around 45. We can assume that. It seems reasonable. Let's talk about specific win rates. This is the interesting one for me. So when we look at win rates and we look at this farm data, let's talk about what these numbers all mean, right? So you're looking at top laners ranging from, like I said, 5 to 10.6 farm per minute, essentially, right? You do have that little bit of lag on the bottom and the little bit on the top, but essentially looking between 5 and 10.6. And what's interesting here is this win rate goes from 40 to 78, and it really kicks off right at this line, which, if we look back up at our information, is at 9.24 farm. So like right here at 9.2. So the vast majority of their farm list, from 0 per minute to 9.2, they're sitting at about a 40 to 48% win rate. They gain 8% win rate. Effectively, they gain 8% win rate, going up to 9.2 farm per minute. That means that top lane farm is really not that vital to win rates until it gets into this really high range. And you see this high range in like Aurelia games. You see this high range in Fiora games. You see this high range in just really big top lane carries that are designed to be the carry. And you're going to see those really high numbers, which, as I've said, are exceeding 9.2 and into the 10 and further on past 10.6 range. And that's when you really start to see that win rate hike up past 70. So essentially, for most top laners, you're looking at this kind of 40 to 48% win rate from 5 to 9.2 farm, which is insane to me personally. The fact that big of a farm range has that small of an impact. That's kind of our baseline for increasing your farm rate to increase your win rate. Then we jump to jungle, and jungle is just a mess in groups A and B. Up until that line, it's just a mess. 5% in group A, 28% in group B. And let's talk a little bit about why that is. Well, group A is from 0 to 3.2. 3.2. Group B is 3.2 to 4.4. So you're looking at from 0 to 4.4 farm per minute. It's a very, very low win rate. Incredibly low win rate. Less than 30%. And once they pass that 4.4 threshold, they start seeing really high increases in win rate. And it actually gets pretty high into the 70 range once they hit this 6.8 to 8.9, 8.09 stride. And that's interesting to me because when we talk about junglers in pro play, you see a lot of facilitating junglers. You don't see a lot of carries anymore. You see a lot of people that are looking for a 2 to 3 item power spike. They're looking to get their carries ahead. They're looking to make a lot happen on the map rather than just getting themselves ahead. So it's really interesting to me that they don't seem to need much more than that 4.4. That 4.4 gets them to the point where it's out of their hands. It is into the carry's hands of who's going to win the game and how the game is going to get won. But it's that magical 4.4 that they can do that. And so it's really important for junglers to hit that stride and to be able to get to that point. But past that point, it doesn't really seem all that important. We also see that by increasing your farm from 0 to 4.4, so just an increase of 4, you increase your win rate by 50%. Let's be a little bit nicer to top laners. Increasing your CS by 4 per minute can increase your win rate by 45% as a jungler. That's a much bigger number. But then you look at the top end, going from 4 to 8 as a jungler still increases your win rate by 12% overall. Looking at there's a little bit there, and I think that has to do with, like I said, junglers aren't really looking to carry. Junglers are looking to facilitate leads for their respective carries, mid laner, ADC. So, already right off the bat, you can kind of see this dynamic of who needs farm and at what points of the game. You see the junglers do need farm, but they don't need near as much. And top laners just kind of, as long as they hit that magic window, of between 5 and 9, which is a pretty big window. As long as you're hitting between 5 and 9, they're pretty much set. Junglers, as long as you're exceeding that 4.4, you're set as well. Mid is when things get a little bit more interesting. You see this same kind of lineup. It goes from 40% up to 75%. It's that same upward trend we've been seeing, but it's much more linear. The difference is that mid's bottom out range is about 6 per minute, and its upper range for that 75% win rate is 10.6, which was the same as top lane. So mid lane has a higher kind of baseline that they need, but their upper limit's the exact same. So they're kind of looking at the same thing as top lane is. The difference is that, like, let's say you're both sitting at 7 farm. Top laner is sitting pretty in this 48%, whereas mid laner is sitting at a 40. So all of a sudden, it starts to become apparent mid laner seems to need a lot more there. Mid laner can also get some pretty high win rates in the 75 and that 79 for ADC. ADC's, I'm just going to segue on to ADC. It's the exact same. You see the exact same come through with ADC of a consistently rising win rate, consistently rising farm. ADC just seems to look a little bit higher than mid at any given time, about 1 CS higher at any given point. But support's also interesting because you start to see this kind of 0.5 is their lower limit. And like I said, I kind of shifted this all. So this is the group A for support is only 1 standard deviation off as opposed to 2 for everyone else. And then I have 1 deviation added onto the other end. So their average just sits between this 0.52 and 1.68. And that's a really reasonable value for supports. You're talking a 30-minute game. That's asking them to get 40 farm. That's asking them to get 40 to 50 farm in a 30-minute game, which Relic Shield supports are going to be getting most of the time. And then Spell Thief supports are also going to pretty reasonably get it. And similar, you see that same consistent winner, except what's interesting with support is it seems to almost kind of taper, seems to almost kind of do this deal. And that makes sense because the more farm you're putting on a support, all of a sudden the less you can put on these other 4 lanes. And as we've discussed, these two just kind of keep increasing in power the more they get farm. And top lane, yes, they don't really care about their farm past this point, but if they're building carry, they definitely do. And so anytime you've got 2 to 3 other carries in your game, there's no reason for the support to be getting the resources. Same thing with jungle. Once they hit that magic 4.4, they don't really need much beyond that. Once they're getting that magic 4.4, they can start giving camps to ADC, they can start giving camps to mid. That's why you see buff transfers go on. That's why you see mid laners take blue buffs and ADCs take red buffs. Not to mention all of the stat boosts and the buffs that the actual buffs give. It's also because that's just more resources that the jungler doesn't need and that the other champions do. Yeah, so we're going to talk about these last 2 sections. We have our average portion and the upper limit portion. And what these are is just how much of professional players, how much of pro play actually sees these numbers, right? And this average portion is just your group C, right? It's just in this bell curve, average, deviation. This is group C, as we've discussed. This right here, this whole thing, if I can hit it right, that's group C. We'll even shade it in to be nice and pretty. That's group C. So when you're sitting here looking at what group C actually means, it's just the bulk, right? It's the average, and you can see that's reflected here. Pretty consistently, you see 70% for top lane. Top lane actually has quite a bit of low-end variance. They see a lot more people in this B tier than anywhere else. Surprisingly, there's a lot of people in that B tier for top lane. Jungle, you see 80% of people sit in that 4.4 to 6.8, which is exactly what we're looking for. I said you hit that magic 4.4, you just kind of hang out there. 80% of junglers in pro play are hitting that level. And we'll get to the next section after that. 69% of mid laners are hitting that mid range. 76% of bottom laners are hitting that, and then 90% of supports are in their respective average, which is group B, but 90% of supports. So you see nearly every support fall into that average window. And that's just because there's ways for supports to get gold, right? And there's not really carry supports where they're farming a lot. And so that all tracks. This upper limit position, or this upper limit portion, is referring to just groups D and E. So it's just this section. It's everything beyond that first standard deviation, so it's just the above average. Only 15% of top laners are hitting that window. That means that 85% of top laners are sitting consistently at less than 9.24 farm per minute, which that's a lot, right? 9.24 is a ton, unless you're playing, again, a carry top laner. 9.24 is a ton to match, and it would be impressive to hit that on a non-carry top laner, and it's not surprising that most non-carry top laners in pro play are not hitting those numbers. Jungle, you see 11% are exceeding 7 farm per minute, and that's the interesting difference for me between pro play and solo queue. Is you see a lot of junglers focus on farming, you see a lot of junglers focus on getting ahead in farm, but that's really not the focus for pro players. Pro junglers, especially in spring, their main focus is getting their team ahead. It's getting their carries ahead, getting that taken care of. So much so that you see 89% of pro junglers are getting less than 7 farm per minute. Mid, you see 16% of mid laners are exceeding 9.4. Again, it's the same as top lane, except you see more carries mid. That's a hard number to reach. I think 10.8 is perfect in a lane. You're essentially missing 1 minion every minute. Like that's kind of insane. Then you see 13% of ADCs are getting less than 10.3. That's the other one, is that you see the ADCs are getting so much more of that attention because, again, they're missing 1 minion every 2 minutes, effectively, assuming they're only getting farm from their own lane. 87% of pro ADCs are missing. So those are tall orders for ADCs to get without any help. It's really nice that they have this 6.87 and this 2.26 that can help them out with that. you only see 2% of supports exceeding 1.68 a minute. And I can almost guarantee that that 2% is filled exclusively by Senna. Hey there, it's Editing Calebrew here. Not 2% that I was talking about. And I found out the most common we see are Rel, Pike. You see a lot of Tom Kench. You see a surprising amount of Scion, a lot of Set, a lot of Seraphine, a lot of Leona. A lot of these are all really good matchups with Senna, and so I'm going to make a reasonable assumption that that is where it's coming from. But yeah, back to, past me. Because the value of Enchanter supports and the value of pushing all of those resources onto other people is so much bigger. And we see with all of these numbers that on average, you're getting somewhere in the realm of 40 CS per minute as a team. Reasonably, you're getting about 40 CS per minute as a team. And that's a lot for 3 lanes in a jungle. That's a lot. That's almost perfect on these pro players. And so it's not a matter of getting as much as you can. It's a matter of putting it on the right people. And I think that's kind of the takeaway for me. It seems to me that it is much more important where the farm goes than the fact that it's picked up once you get to that level. When you're in my lovely low elo, it's just about getting it. The more farm you get, the better you're doing. But I think it's important to remember in a lot of scenarios, especially as a jungler or as a support, you don't need it all. You just need enough to survive. We're going to pull it so it's all me. Thanks for watching, assuming you made it all the way to the end. I really like League of Legends stats, as you can tell, and it's something very interesting to me. Those of you that know League of Legends know it's a really complex game, and so it's exciting for me to kind of break all of that down and figure out why numbers are the way they are. And those of you who don't know about League of Legends got to hear Big Beard Man talk about nerd shit for like 15 minutes, so that's cool. Yeah, I just like and subscribe. I'd give you my P.O. box, but if I had one, I'd give you my address, but I think you might come kill me.